appraisals. And we talked about appraisals earlier in the semester. So you may want to go back and look at your notes from chapter 4, that, just to get yourself back up to speed. So when we're thinking about stress, you want to be thinking about, how do you cope? And there are lots of different ways that people cope, some of which are positive, some of which are negative. And we want to be paying attention to that range of things that people do, or that you do, and what is healthy, what isn't. Barbara Amaya, who was trafficked and prostituted, described using substances and alcohol as a way of handling some of the distressing feelings and thoughts that she had during this period, and something that she's continued to struggle with since then. Think about how Magda is handling things and how the people around her are handling things. So she talks about when her mother died of cancer, she was in middle school. And there was so much sadness around her related to her mother's death, but also related to those other losses. Her friends started distancing themselves from her as though cancer or losing a mom was contagious. Her dad buried himself in his work. And she says, it's the overwhelming loneliness, losing my friends, becoming a social pariah, that are truly traumatic. Losing my mom wasn't really the trauma. So think about what kinds of coping she, her friends, her family, or her father are using. And think about how her family, how these people could have intervened to help her cope better. And why? Why would those have been helpful? So as we're thinking about coping, we want to be aware of the potential stressor. And remember, part of the reason I use the word potential is that there's nothing inherent in that stressor that makes it stressful. It's how we're seeing it. Our appraisals, either primary or secondary, primary appraisals including threat, loss, challenge, our secondary appraisals including our self-efficacy and the resources we believe we have. And that may lead us to a particular response. So just to review, during a primary appraisal, we have to decide, is this relevant and threatening or not? If it's not, we're not going to experience stress. During a secondary appraisal, we have to decide whether our resources seem to be adequate or going to be taxed by what's going on. If we decide that our coping resources are adequate, we're not going to experience stress. If they're inadequate, we're going to experience stress. So I was traveling home from college early one morning, got on Chicago's L, where there was only one other person. He was masturbating and exhibiting himself. I chose to stay in that car and sat with my back to him where I could ignore him. I never told my parents, as I feared they would never let me ride the L again. And I loved the L. I loved the freedom of public transportation. And I didn't see myself as harmed or incapable in that particular situation. So think about what my primary appraisals were, and also what my secondary appraisals were. Think about whether my appraisals protected me or hurt me, and why? And again, I'm not asking if my decisions were wise. I might handle that situation differently today. But was, you know, how did my appraisals work? We've talked about this a couple of times before. Um, you know, we certainly don't want to be sensitized in our response to stress where everything sort of knocks us for a loop. And in general, we don't want to be unresponsive. We want our response to be appropriate and to serve us well, to keep us safe in a given situation. Think about how you appraise the bad things in your life. What kinds of primary appraisals do you make? What kind of secondary appraisals do you tend to make? And do you tend to make different kinds of primary or secondary appraisals in certain kinds of situations? And I'm going to end this video with some quotes from Viktor Frankl, who is both an existential psychotherapist, so focusing on the just the nature of existence, and how sometimes that is really challenging for many of us. But he is a well-known psychotherapist who survived Auschwitz, and what he says is that, and he wrote, some, very remarkable and moving books about his experience there. But what he says is that those who have a why can bear with almost any what. And he sort of suggests that those people who didn't have a purpose, didn't have a reason to continue, found it very difficult to continue. He said, everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. And I'm going to say goodbye, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.